In terms of time, Nazim, we are up to what, 6 o'clock? Yeah, 6. So approximately about 45 minutes or half an hour, and then we can open it for question and answer.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good evening, friends. Let me begin by sincerely thanking Zaid Bhai and Nazim Bhai and Zarina Behan. It's an honor for me to know you. And I want to thank my dear friend and colleague at the Gandhi Mandela Center for India-Africa Cooperation, Dr. Renu Modi, who heads the Center for African Studies at Mumbai University, for introducing me to these wonderful people and hence facilitating this evening's interaction. Before I begin, I respectfully salute all the great leaders, sages, philosophers, social reformers of Kenya and Africa. We in India know very little about them. Very sad. We know one Nelson Mandela, but Jomo Kenyatta, Julius Nyerere, Harry Tuku, Patrice Lumumba, so many of them, we have forgotten them. We also forgotten one of our own, and that is Pio Gama Pinto. Zaid Bhai, just this morning, a very dear friend of mine in Mumbai, Ajay Kamlakaran, he has written a wonderful piece on Pio Gama Pinto at scroll.com, in which he has referred to your tribute in Awaz to Pio Gama Pinto. It's sad that the spirit of the common anti-colonial struggle, that spirit is waning. There was a time when India and Africa stood in strong solidarity, helping each other, supporting each other, and raising one voice against imperialism, against colonial slavery. But India, sadly, has forgotten its own anti-colonial struggle, and it's going in the wrong direction right now. As Zaid Bhai in his introductory remarks mentioned, much of what Gandhi stood for, what Nehru stood for, and because of which Africa came to admire them, the rest of the world came to admire them, those values are receding into the background. So let me tell you a little bit about this Gandhi Mandela Center that we established in Mumbai. When we chose the name Mandela, it was not just to focus on South Africa, but we wanted to embrace the whole of Africa, with Mandela as one recognizable name. And Gandhi and Mandela, they symbolize the bond between India and Africa. But let me make it very clear that it's not exclusive between India and South Africa, but India and Africa as a whole. This is our non-governmental initiative to bring greater awareness about Africa in India, which, as I said, is unfortunately lacking. For me, I use this trip to discover Africa at a little deeper level. My wife, Dr. Kamakshi Bhate, and I, we spent 10 days in South Africa, mainly to discover the Gandhian heritage in South Africa, in Johannesburg, Durban, Pretoria, elsewhere. Then we came to Rwanda, and from Rwanda we come to Kenya. And this discovery of contemporary Africa, along with historical Africa, is extremely important for all those who are committed to a new and better world order. As Farid Zakaria has written in a famous book, the world is changing very rapidly, the West is declining, and the rest is rising. The West is declining and the rest is rising. And within the rest, it is Asia that is rising. Not exclusively Asia, but the world recognizes, the world sees Asia rising, and within Asia, it is China and India. But we cannot have a better world order and new world order with only Asia rising. Africa has to rise, Latin America has to rise for an equitable new world order. And Africa is indeed changing. It has changed in many positive ways over the past decades. The era, of course, of colonialism is over. Even the era of military dictatorships and coups is largely over. There's new self-confidence in Africa. And just as China is looking at its own centenary goal, Pan-Africans in Africa, you also have your own centenary goal of 2063, Vision 2063. All this is very heartening. At the same time, as an outsider, it pains us to know that there are still many negative features. I told you that I was in South Africa. It's one of the richest nations in Africa. But, friends, to know that there is 50 to 70% unemployment in South Africa. The divide between the rich and poor is widening. Crime is frightening. Corruption. The once great African National Congress is becoming unpopular. From there we came to Rwanda, and Rwanda presented a very different picture. Many positive features, but there's no democracy. I don't know much about Kenya, but the point I'm making is that we in India and all of you in Africa, we have to work together. And when I say negative features, they're not exclusive to Africa at all. There are so many negatives about India, even though India is rising. Some Zaid Bhai mentioned, but equally the disparity between the rich and the poor is alarming. The divide between urban, rural is alarming. So we have to recognize both our strengths as well as our weaknesses and shortcomings, and use this understanding to forge new bonds of solidarity. So our common goal, friends, has to be to work for peace, justice, human dignity. Our common goal has to be for equitable development, sustainable development. and people's welfare. People's welfare has to be absolutely the core of development. The common goal also has to be cultural renaissance. It has to be harmony among religions and races. It has to be gender justice, women's empowerment. It has to be an end to militarism, an end to nuclear weapons and all weapons of mass destruction. Our goal also has to be to save the planet from the climate crisis. And we have to achieve all this within the framework of democracy. There are countries that are achieving some of these objectives, but not following the path of democracy. China is a prime example. Now, if these are our priorities, the question is, how relevant is Mahatma Gandhi for Africa, for India, and for the rest of the world? You framed that the theme of this interaction today, Gandhi's relevance in Africa today. I would like to present my views, friends, by dividing this into 3 questions. Before, how relevant is Gandhi for today's Africa? I would like to tell you how relevant Africa was for Gandhi. Because South Africa has the most transformative impact on the life of Mahatma Gandhi and therefore on the entire freedom struggle of India. So that's the first part of my presentation. The second is how he used what he learned and experienced and reflected upon in South Africa and his interaction with people in the rest of Africa. And in this context, I must recognize Keshavji, about whom Nazim Bhai told me earlier, and it's fascinating how this family that lives in Kenya had an intimate relationship with Mahatma Gandhi. And there are so many such families. So it's not just South Africa, but also the rest of Africa had an impact on Gandhi. So I'm going to talk about how his experience and his self-transformation in Africa was useful in India's freedom struggle. And therefore, based on this African experience and Indian experience, how Gandhi is relevant to Africa today, India today, and the entire world. So first, how Africa impacted Gandhi. I'm sure many of you know this, but it bears repetition. The 21 years that Gandhi spent in South Africa were most transformative, from 1893 and 1914. He went there as a young, failed lawyer at the age of 23 to South Africa because he got a brief from a wealthy Gujarati merchant, Seth Dada Abdullah. And it was for only 1 year. But he went on to spend 1/3 of his working life in South Africa. So this transformation was at the level of transformation of his self, his personal transformation, his attempts to transform the society around him, and the worldview that helped him then thereafter to address transformation of the world. So self, society, and the world. All this happened in those 21 years. in the words of Nelson Mandela, he said, when he came to India after his release, and he said, "You gave us Mohandas Gandhi, we returned him to you as Mahatma Gandhi." So it was South Africa that made Mohandas into Mahatma. Mahatma means the great soul. A similar observation was made by Hasim Sidat, a great South African student of Gandhi's life and legacy. He says, "I am proud of the fact the world's biggest diamond was found in our mines, in South African mines. But what we returned to you as Mahatma Gandhi was an incomparably more precious and polished diamond." This is Hasim Sidat. Fatima Mir, Mandela's close associate in the anti-apartheid movement and a renowned Gandhian scholar herself, has this to say about what South Africa did to Mohandas Gandhi. And I had the good fortune of meeting her, a great woman, great fighter, and a scholar, when I visited South Africa 2 decades ago. She says, and I quote, "On the 18th of July 1914, 21 years after his arrival, Mohan, accompanied by his family, left South Africa. He had come to the country as a young man of 23, a semi-Englishman. When he came to South Africa, he was a semi-Englishman. His host, on meeting him, had wondered how he could afford to keep such an expensive-looking dandy. If you see Mahatma Gandhi's earlier dress, he tried to dress like an Englishman. His tastes had continued to be expensive for a while, but they had changed through the intermingling of thoughts and experiences. Now he left the country bearing all the signs of a man who would soon be recognized as a saint. When he went back to India. As Christ became the savior, Muhammad the prophet, Gautama the Buddha, the little boy who was frightened of the dark in his childhood, became the Mahatma and paid the price of all Mahatmas. Meaning thereby that ultimately, for his ideals, for his concerns, for his commitments, he paid with his life. I'll come to that later. The transformation of Gandhi into Mahatma in remote South Africa is, by any reckoning, one of the most extraordinary events in human history. There are 3 things that are important in knowing how South Africa impacted him. One is his religious view. His view on religions changed in an amazing way, and that's so relevant for what Zaid Bhai mentioned about what's happening in India today. He was a devout Hindu, and he remained a devout Hindu till the last breath of his life. As many of you know, when he was assassinated on the 30th January 1948 by a fanatic extremist Hindu, Nathuram Godse, the last words he uttered were, "Hey Ram." He was a devout Hindu. But in South Africa, he understood his own Hinduism in a very different way. Very different from how Hinduism is being politicized and practiced now. That is, he developed deep respect for all other religions, for Christianity, for Islam, for Judaism, and even, Zaid Bhai, for some indigenous African religions. You know, this time when we were in Durban at the Phoenix Ashram, I met one person, a Zulu. He is a follower of a church, a local, an indigenous church, which worships a prophet called Prophet Isaiah. It's called Shembe, Church of Shembes. Now he said that Gandhi used to interact with that person because he was his neighbor, and that person came to regard Gandhi, begin to respect him. So there is a certain interaction between Gandhi and even the blacks. It's very important to know in the context of some of the allegations that are being made about Gandhi, that he was anti-black and racist. And this is also a subject that I'll come to later. So he discovered that all the great religions of the world inculcate equality and brotherhood of mankind and extol the virtue of tolerance. He also realized that all religions, in their essence, stand on a foundation of certain common moral values, which do not privilege the strong against the weak, which do not privilege the strong against the weak. Rather, they impose a greater obligation on the strong to protect the weak. That is the basic teaching of all religions. Protect the weak, protect the needy. There are also certain unacceptable aspects in all religions. Friends, this is also very important to know. There are also certain unacceptable aspects in all religions that need to be discarded when they militate against justice and human conscience. Which is why Europe's oppression, colonial oppression of Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world, and its misuse of Christianity for this purpose, made him declare, he said, that religion and that nation will be blotted out of the face of the earth, which pins its faith on injustice, untruth, and violence. He had deep respect for Christianity, but he abhorred the political use of Christianity for colonial oppression. Now, his experience in Africa, it strengthened his belief in Hinduism. And he said that if I call myself a Hindu, it's my duty to become a better Hindu. Similarly, a true Muslim should become a better Muslim. A true Christian should become a better Christian. And it is for this reason that he was not in favor of religious conversion. Rather, he favored conversion of a different kind, that is internal conversion. That is, you have to convert yourself from a lower level of existence to a higher level of existence. That is the conversion that every person should strive for. And it is for this reason that in South Africa itself, he became a strong proponent of religious harmony. And something that he employed on a much grander scale when he went back to India. The second way in which South Africa impacted Gandhi was that it made him an uncompromising internationalist. Although we call Gandhi the father of our nation, he himself would not have liked it, because he said that there's a very audacious statement that he once made. He said, "I'm not a servant of India. I'm a servant of truth. And if India does anything wrong, if India deviates from the path of truth, then I will rebel against India." What a courage, what moral courage to speak these words. So he was an internationalist. And it is Africa that made him an internationalist. the three most important persons that impacted him in South Africa, one was Indian, that was a Jain monk, Srimad Rajchandraji. But there were two foreign personalities, John Ruskin and Tolstoy. It was from John Ruskin that he understood the meaning of Sarvodaya. In African context, it is Ubuntu. The welfare of one is the welfare of all. There cannot be welfare of anyone without the welfare of all. Sarvodaya. Udaya of Sarva. Rise of all. The second person I mentioned, friends, was Tolstoy, the great Russian writer. During this visit, we had the good fortune of visiting Tolstoy farm near Johannesburg. The two ashrams or the communes that Gandhi established in South Africa, one near Durban, Phoenix settlement, and the second near Johannesburg, Tolstoy farm. Why Tolstoy? Because their constitution made Hindus and Sikhs and other minorities as second-class citizens. And over a period of time, the numbers of Hindus and Sikhs has shrunk in Pakistan. It is also shrinking in Bangladesh. Now, the majoritarianism in India are following that wrong path. And it will create many problems for India in the future. And therefore, some of us in India, we strongly believe that we must go back to the teachings of Gandhi and other, of course, not just Gandhi, but every great personality from India, whether it is Guru Nanak, whether it is Kabir, all of the great saints, they all have preached brotherhood. And this is our fight in India. And it is for this reason that, as Zahid Bhai mentioned earlier, along with in Hindu-Muslim harmony, some of us are also active in trying to promote India-Pakistan-Bangladesh cooperation. And this is the title of my book, India-Pakistan-Bangladesh Confederation. If Europe, after two horrific wars, the First World War and the Second World War, if they can come together as a European Union, why not India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and other countries in South Asia? And I would urge the same for nations in Africa, African Union, East African cooperation. These are the new pathways that we should follow. I'll come to the next questions. People's welfare. See, people's welfare as an integral part of economic development was something at the very core of Gandhian philosophy. There is a term in Sanskrit. I mentioned Sarvodaya, but there is also one more word, Antyodaya. Antyodaya means the welfare of the last man in the queue. The last man in the queue will be the first priority of development. This was Gandhi's view. So our whole development priority around the world must change. You also asked a question about unwanted aspects of religion. And I did not quite hear you. Did you mention eye donation or something? Yes. Some religions, huh? Yeah. You see, these are certain wrong beliefs that many religions have. And my wife, Kamakshi, is a strong activist in the organ donation campaign in India. Donation of eyes, donation of skin, other parts of, and she gives lectures, and that what is the way in which we can continue to live after death? It is by donating what we have. Now, isn't that doing good to humanity? And whatever is good for humanity, how can it be anti-religion?
Can I just say
Yeah.
something? It's a very, very relevant thing which you have raised. In our organ donation campaign, some of the people start saying that why should we give, some people say that I want to donate the eye of my relative, but it should go to Hindu, because the Muslims are not donating, which is not true. The thing is, this is also another way of dividing, and it's no religion. Actually, there are some researches in our own groups, NGOs have done, which say that no religion on the face of earth is saying that don't donate. And whatever what we donate is whatever we have. We do not take from somebody else and donate. So my body and my this thing is my own, and that alone I am donating, and with no religion will say no, don't donate. And unfortunately, our body becomes is in the possession of our relatives, and so they are the things of, so they are supposed to be donating, and no religion will say no.
My last, there's a question about the Tolstoy, not a question, but a very important piece of information that you shared, Keshavji, about Tolstoy farm and how Gandhiji learned about Islam and Islamic prayers from his Muslim satyagrahis. He was willing to learn from everyone. He was not just a teacher, he was also a student. And there's a very important, his experiments in education. He made some, fundamental experiments in education, and he says that we should learn as if we are going to die tomorrow. Sorry, we should live as if we are going to die tomorrow, and we should learn as if we are going to live forever, which means lifelong learning. Live in such a way that even the last day of your life is a day dedicated to learning. So he was in his ashrams, in his communes, in all his campaigns, he was always willing to learn from others. And I am very happy to know from you this close bond between your family and Gandhiji, and I would be very happy to know more about it and pay tribute to it in my own way. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Sudheendra, let's give others a chance, please, if you don't mind. Yeah, Ravinder, Janet, anybody else? It has to be a woman. So let's start with you.
There's a lady who raised her.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. I didn't see. I'm sorry. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Let's start with you.
Professor, thank you very much for a good synopsis of Gandhi and his values. I'd like to hear more about his views on power. Because, yes, because much as every spiritual tradition talks about unity and togetherness and we're all the same, but our systems are based on separating and separation and on power. So the intoxication of power is the most corrupting influence in any society. And so I think it all sounds very idyllic, but the point still remains, once someone has power, they have the ability to distort and what is true, what is not true, etc., etc. So in the reality of corrupt regimes, dictatorships, how do you begin to dislodge, no matter how passionate one might be about Gandhiji's very universal values and truths? Thank you.
Yeah, Ravinder?
Professor, I'd like to hear your views on the tension between Mahatma and Dr. Ambedkar, who, as you know, was a Dalit and who quit Hinduism and became a Buddhist. Also that Gandhi is an absolutist. You either accept his definition of truth or you don't, and you cannot contest it. He is an absolutist in terms of Hinduism and the structure of Hinduism, which is based on casteism, which is what the Indian politics are about. And although he was for Harijans, but he would, according to Ambedkar, was absolutist about Hinduism. And you're very well aware that Arundhati Roy very well documented in a fictional dialogue between Ambedkar and Gandhi on that tension. But on his absolutism of truth as a foundation for action is very, very contestable.
Thank you. Give it to Kenneth. Next to you.
Okay. Thank you very much for such quite eye-opening presentation and thought-provoking, I thought. Mine are just two simple questions. I'm sure you will agree with me that we live in a world that has a very interesting binary of extremes. And I'm having in mind on one side the notion of globalization made possible by computing technology, which is really on one hand has made the world a global village. It has constricted all sorts of boundaries, racial, gender, creed, name it. And on the other side, we have the resurgence of right-wing forces all over around us, which are inward-looking and progressive, and most of the values of neoliberal thinking that we hold dear. My simple question is, what has made this possible, these contradictions that we witness in our world today? And how then do we fit the ideals of Gandhiji within this matrix of contradictions that seem to be increasing by the day? Then the other one is, I was a student in JNU in the mid-90s at the School for Social Sciences, Center for Historical Studies, and I did an MPhil on modern Indian history. And recently, there was news all over the world about the attack of students and teachers at JNU. The attack of lecturers and students in the campus in JNU. And one of my students who knew that I had a connection with JNU, he asked me a very simple question which I didn't have an answer. And probably you would have an answer that I will take to this student of mine. How can this happen in the land of Gandhi? That's what the student asked. And I now put it to you, sir. Thank you.
Brian?
Thank you. I just wanted to remind you about, an important point you made that Zahid brought about what happened in Ghana and Malawi, the movement on Gandhi must fall, if you can please shed some light on that. And his racist comments against the blacks and what he said about the whites being predominant and so on.
Sure, yeah.
Excuse me, I just want to
Sure.
ask you about a question about was the man who assassinated Gandhi, was he from a special group? Did he belong to a group that was against Gandhi? Is it called the RSS? And what are your views on RSS right now? They're coming out, I understand, they want to raise an army of 40 million Hindus. What are your views on that?
Let me begin with this.
Okay,
The person who assassinated,
10 minutes more?
yeah, sure.
Thank you.
The person who assassinated Gandhi was an extremist Hindu, Nathuram Godse, anti-Muslim and anti-Pakistan, and because of this, anti-Gandhi. At that time, he was not part of the RSS. He started his ideological life in the RSS, but he left the RSS. My views on the RSS today, see, we should understand the resurgence of Hindu politics. It's a very complex phenomenon, and maybe separately we can have a discussion. But communalism and extremism of one kind reinforces and supports communalism and extremism of another kind. And this is what is happening in South Asia today. And therefore, RSS, having worked with a political party that was close to the RSS for many years, I was with the BJP for many years. I worked under a BJP Prime Minister. I know that the BJP as well as the RSS, these are complex institutions. There are many pluses, there are many negatives. And the India of today cannot be divided in black and white terms. We need a different kind of reconciliation in which there has to be a positive dialogue between the positives of this group, the positives of the other group, not confrontation. Confrontation would lead to civil war in India, which would be disastrous. Anyway, now there's a very important question about power. Gandhi's ideas about power very different. I mentioned to you that even though he was a politician who led a political struggle, he never was after power. But he also was against the kind of power matrix that existed then and that has continued now. He was for decentralization. Decentralization to the point of individual. Each individual has to become empowered. He's understanding, the friends, since many of you are from Indian origin, you perhaps know the word for freedom in India is Swaraj. Freedom movement is called Swaraj. It is Swa and Raj. Raj is governance. Swa is self. But he gave a very interesting interpretation of Swaraj that goes to answer your question. He was for India's freedom, that is India's Swaraj. But at the same time, he said there should also be Swaraj of the individual, which means not just rule of self, but rule over self. Meaning, self has a very, it's a very expansive idea. Self can be individual self, self can be national self. So, power for the nation, but also for the individual. Power for what? Power to govern oneself. Which means govern with responsibility, govern with a sense of duty. So, abuse of power that you mentioned happens because power is centralized today. Even in so-called democracies like India, we do not have decentralized power. We are democratic only in some notional ways. So true democracy, according to Gandhi, was decentralization. and empowerment of the individual, empowerment of communities, of neighborhoods, and there it empowerment of the nation, but all the time through interdependence. No one exercising power to oppress, suppress the other. Unfortunately, we are far away from that ideal in India and also in several worse cases around the world. There's a question here about Gandhi and Ambedkar. Now, you mentioned, dear friend, that he was absolutist. He was not absolutist. He never believed that his truth is absolute. He never said that my truth is final. He was open to learning from others, accepting others, and self-correcting. So this charge of absolutism against Gandhi doesn't stick. On caste, well before he came in contact with Ambedkar, and well before Ambedkar himself started a campaign against caste discrimination, Gandhi had started his campaign against untouchability. Of course, the paths of Ambedkar and Gandhi in some ways were divergent, but the goals were convergent. That convergence is something that many people in India and around the world are trying to obscure. Both were working for the same cause. Their ideas were different. And Gandhi's ideas about caste, they evolved over time. He never was casteist. He never was casteist. He never believed in the superiority of some castes and inferiority of other castes. But again, this Gandhi-Ambedkar debate is something that I would be very happy to exchange my thoughts with you, and I don't claim to know everything and say that I alone am right. But for the good of India and for true reform of Indian society, we need to continue the fight against caste discrimination and fight for the rights of the oppressed and the marginalized. The next set of questions is about why has the world become so binary in extremes. Now, friend, I don't have all the answers, but I'm as deeply troubled as you are, and all of us are, about these divisions in the age of globalization. Globalization is a great thing. It has brought the world together. And therefore, this is in fact the theme of my book. My book is called Music of the Spinning Wheel, Mahatma Gandhi's Manifesto for the Internet Age. I have tried to argue that he would have been a great champion of the internet and other technologies that are bringing the world together and connecting the world and making more and more interdependent, making the world a global village. He would have been a great champion of that. But in the kind of globalization that we have witnessed, again, because of power imbalance, the fruits are cornered by some and the rest are disempowered and impoverished. Now, this is what we have to fight against. But in fighting against this, we should not go against globalization as such. We should in fact reform globalization and make it a more perfect globalization. About JNU, how could this happen in JNU, in a university that bears the name of Nehru and in the land of Gandhi? Very sad, very unfortunate, but this is because of the rise of intolerance in India. There is a politics of intolerance, and people believe that those with liberal views, those who speak for harmony need to be suppressed. And they even take to violent means to do that. And that is what has happened in JNU, in many places. But let me say one thing, that they do not constitute the majority. Indian society is very resilient. Indian society will fight against all that is going wrong. Indian society will come back to the right path because our culture, our civilization, our spiritual traditions are very strong. Even our democracy is very strong. And in course of time, I'm sure that many of these things will be set right. Now, final thing, I'm very happy that this question was asked about Gandhi as a racist. Friends, it's not my claim, and it certainly wouldn't have been his claim at all that Gandhi was God or godlike, who would make no mistakes. Only God is perfect. Human beings are not. And he was not a perfect human being. He evolved over time. Some of his views, when he first came to South Africa, and what he said about the native black community were highly problematic, questionable, and indefensible. But he changed. He changed even when he was in South Africa itself. And therefore, let me give a few quotes, Gandhi's own quotes, both when he was in South Africa and subsequently when he went back to India, that contradict this claim that he was a racist. He says in 1939, "I yield to no one in my regard for the Zulus, the Bantus, and other races of South Africa. I used to enjoy intimate relations with many of them. I had the privilege of often advising them and learning from them." Then in 1908, in a speech in Johannesburg, he says that the colored means not just Asiatics, not just Indians, but also blacks. The colored and the whites, reformed whites, all different races should commingle and produce, and if they commingle, they will produce a civilization that perhaps the world has not yet seen. He was not for segregation. He was for commingling of races. The Indians do not regret that capable natives can exercise the franchise. They would regret if it were otherwise. They, however, assert that they too, if capable, should have the right. That is, Indians too should have the right, the same right as the natives. We hear nowadays a great deal of the segregation policy, as if it were possible to put people in watertight compartments. Not possible, he says. Then he says, if we look into the future, it is not a heritage we have to leave to posterity, that all the different races commingle. We should not put it to future, we should start it now. That all different races commingle and produce, as I said earlier, a civilization that perhaps the world has not yet seen. Now, coming to Pan-Africanism, he says that England has got successful competitors in America, Japan, France, Germany. It has competitors in the handful of mills in India. And as there has been an awakening in India, even so there will be an awakening in South Africa. As there has been an awakening in India, so there will be an awakening in South Africa with its vastly richer resources. natural, mineral, and human. The mighty English look quite like pygmies. Please pay attention to this. The mighty English look quite pygmies before the mighty races of Africa. The English look pygmies before the mighty races of Africa. This is a tribute to the people of Africa. It's not a racist comment. And he says, a day will come, in the course of a few years, the Western nations may cease to find in Africa a dumping ground for their wares. In a few years, the Western nations may cease to find in Africa a dumping ground for their wares, which means a self-reliant Africa where the riches of Africa are for the development of the people of Africa. This is what all the leaders of Pan-Africanism are saying. Then, finally, you, and this is he's written a letter to Reverend S.S. Tema, member of the African National Congress in 1939. He says, you, on the other hand, are the sons of the soil. You are the sons of the soil who are being robbed of your inheritance, who are being corresponded with Tolstoy. And Tolstoy wrote back to him. And that correspondence between Gandhi and Tolstoy is one of the most important exchange of views in the history of philosophy. What an amazing thing that an Indian who goes to remote South Africa and discovers Tolstoy, and then he establishes a commune in the name of Tolstoy. So when we went there, we felt this is true internationalism, which is a treasure of humanity. It should be preserved and publicized. And friends, the third very important way in which Africa impacted Gandhi was that it is there that he discovered, popularized, and practiced the concept of satyagraha. Satyagraha. In Sanskrit, it means agraha for satya. Satya is truth. Agraha is insistence, which means insistence on truth. Whatever we do in life, be it in politics, business, in personal relations, it should all be based on truth. Satyagraha. Of course, a very deep concept, which subsequently he employed when he went to India to counter the might of the British Empire. What it meant is that we are fighting the British because the British are on the side of untruth, immorality, injustice. And to fight them, we have to be always on the path of truth. And he says in another very important exposition, he says, truth is God. There's a friend, I must mention friends. In 1931, after his historic visit to England for the Round Table Conference about India's independence, he undertakes a tour of Europe, and in Geneva, he meets the great French writer, Nobel laureate writer, Romerola. And there is an exchange of views between them on the meaning of God. And Gandhi explains there that truth is God. And in explaining this, he says that there may be some people who may not believe in God, atheists, but there is not a single human being who does not believe in truth. So truth itself means God. And truth has another quality. Truth is non-violence. truth and non-violence are two sides of the same coin. In India, these two words became very famous, Satya and Ahimsa. A person indulging in himsa, violence, cannot be a servant of God, cannot be a servant of truth. And therefore, in fighting the mighty British Empire, he said that we must follow the path of non-violence. We cannot follow the path of violence and hope to be independent and hope to be committed to truth and true Indian culture. At that time, friends, just as in many other parts of the world, there were revolutionaries who believed in the path of violence. Gandhiji opposed them and said that violence creates counter-violence later on. And we all know how revolutions based on violence subsequently ate the children of revolution. It has happened in Russia, it has happened in China, it has happened in many parts of the world. So even if the path of non-violence is long, it takes a lot of patience. In the end, it is the only humane path. So truth, non-violence. But there is also another very important new formulation he makes in South Africa. He says, the active form of non-violence is love. Non-violence, there is a there is a negative, it's a negative connotation. Non-violence, what is the positive form of non-violence? The active form of non-violence, it is love. Love is non-violence. So love for all human beings, love for all non-human creatures, love for everything. It's not for nothing that he was called a saint. He was not a politician. You know, there were many leaders of national liberation struggles in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. There were politicians who, after the success of those national liberation struggles, they came to power. They became presidents, prime ministers. Gandhi is an exception. When India became independent, 1947, August 15, he had absolutely no power in the new government. Not only that, friends, some of you may not know that on the day India became independent, such a historic day, where was Gandhi? Gandhi was not even in the national capital, Delhi, celebrating India's independence. He was in distant Calcutta. Why? Because at that time, there were horrific communal violence between Hindus and Muslims in Calcutta and the rest of Bengal. He went there to douse the flames of violence. He went on foot in all the riot-hit areas of Calcutta, risking his life, no bodyguards, nothing. And within days, the same people who were shouting slogans against Muslims or against Hindus, the same people came to Gandhi and said, we have made a mistake. We shall not fight. And peace returned to Calcutta. Earlier, he went to another place called Noakhali, which is now in Bangladesh, earlier East Pakistan. For 2 months, he went on foot from village to village to village, appealing for peace. So he said, for me, peace between Hindus and Muslims is more important than political independence for India. What a heroic statement to make. He said, independence can wait, but first we must establish harmony and peace. There are not many examples, friends, in world history who espoused peace so valiantly as Gandhi did. So this is what he learned in Africa. I must mention one more very important thing, friends, here. Satyagraha. this concept of satyagraha, one of the influences on him in coming up with this concept of satyagraha was Islam. You know, during my previous visit to Durban, I went to the office of the Natal Indian Congress, which was established by Gandhi. And in front of that office was a mosque. So I went to that mosque, and the person there said that Gandhi used to come to that mosque often and engage in a discussion on the basic principles of Islam. And there he understood the true meaning of jihad. There are two concepts of jihad, the lower jihad and the greater jihad. The greater jihad is the struggle to improve yourself. So satyagraha is also a struggle to improve yourself. So it was on the 11th of September, 1906, that he first introduced the concept of satyagraha, based on what he had learnt about Islam. And it is therefore sad and also ironic that on another 11th September, in the name of Islam, terrorists attacked America. So, the good of religion and the evil of religion. So, with this apprenticeship in Africa, he comes to India. From 1914, when he arrives back in India, 1948, this is the period of his life and work in India. And friends, he transforms Indian politics in ways that nobody before did. And people began to see him as a saint because his attire changed. No longer was he an Englishman looking like an English lawyer. He changed everything. He became a common man. And he preached the basic values of Indian culture, common to all religions. And therefore he became acceptable to people of all castes and all religions. At the same time, he also became a social reformer. He raised the voice against untouchability in Hindu society. He undertook social constructive activities on a huge scale. He established 2 more ashrams in India, one near Gandhinagar, Ahmedabad, the other is called Sevagram. And these ashrams were his laboratories for social reform, where it's amazing that a leader who was fighting the British was also telling the people of India that you have to be clean. You have to keep your village, your town, your surroundings clean. Because he used to clean his own latrines. Self-example. He taught the people of India the message of spinning wheel. That is self-reliance at that time, that we should not be dependent on the British for our clothes. We should enable the poor people to earn their own livings by producing cloth. But friends, it is not just producing cloth. There was a deep philosophy behind the cloth that we call khadi. Some of you may have heard the name khadi. Khadi for him was not just a self-reliant fabric. It stood for one, it was a symbol of the fight against the British, but it was also a symbol of self-rectification, of becoming a moral person living a moral life. And here I would like to recount a very interesting episode in his life. Because in all his campaign, he was telling people to speak the truth, to be honest, to be ethical in everything you do, to be non-violent. So all his followers used to practice this satyagraha, which means non-violent resistance, passive resistance. So one day, some of you who are familiar with Bombay would know, there's a place called Lamington Road. So a group of satyagrahis were protesting in front of a police station. And in this group was a wealthy woman who was also a follower of Gandhi. And she was wearing khadi, but she was also being wealthy. She had some jewelry on her. The police came to arrest her. So before the police took her away, she said to the person standing next to her, "Brother, I am going to be arrested now, and I have some jewelry on me. Will you please give them to my family, and this is the address." And she gave the address. So that person was a stranger. He said, "Sister, I am overwhelmed by your trust in me, because I don't know you, you don't know me. How do you know that I won't run away with this? Why are you trusting me?" And she says, "Brother, you are wearing Gandhi's khadi. A person wearing Gandhi's khadi will not tell a lie, will not be doing anything dishonest. Because khadi, it stands for some values." So this is the cultural transformation that Gandhiji was trying to bring about. And of course, that man did what he was told to do. So for Gandhi, everything, business, industry, trade, politics, teaching, agriculture, everything had to be based on life based on new values, new human values. And this is what is relevant to the world today. So friends, before I close, I would like to mention a few contemporary concerns and challenges which make Gandhi relevant for Africa, for India, and for the rest of the world. I said that he was an internationalist, he was a universalist. His understanding of nationalism was very different from what people have come to know about nationalism as something exclusive. This is my nation, these are aliens, they are foreigners, they belong to a different nation. This understanding of exclusive sovereignty of nations is a Western concept. It's not intrinsic to human history. It's a new concept in history. But unfortunately, the rest of the world has adopted it. And in many places, the West has imposed it on nations around the world. So even after the success of the anti-colonial struggles, we all have become exclusive nations. Gandhi did not believe in it. Which is why he was opposed to the creation of Pakistan. There's a very interesting exchange of views between him and Jinnah. He says that if you want to have Pakistan, you have Pakistan, but not on the basis of the so-called two-nation theory. That is, Hindus are a separate nation and the Muslims are a separate nation. If you have to have a separate thing, let's separate as brothers. In family, it often happens that after some time, the family brothers begin to live in different homes, but they are together. So Gandhi was telling Jinnah that you may have your Pakistan, but as brothers. If the Muslim League had accepted that kind of independence or independence from the British, but interdependence between India and Pakistan, the history of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh would have been very different. He was and in fact, 4 days before his assassination, in his prayer meeting, in his all religion prayer meetings, all his prayer meetings were prayers of all religions, not just Hindu, Christian, Islam, every religion. So 4 days before his assassination, friends, he says that I am both an Indian and a Pakistani. You know, what an audacious statement to make. And I am going to Pakistan to give the message that we should love together. We should live in love and brotherhood. And 4 days later, he's assassinated. In fact, the person who assassinated him was angry with him because he was preaching friendship with Pakistan and friendship with Muslims. He became a martyr to the cause of religious harmony. And he became a martyr to the cause of India-Pakistan friendship. So, I am coming back to this point about how he is relevant today. Nationalism should not be exclusive, it should be cooperative. I was just now talking to Honorable Kevit Desai. He said that he is in the Ministry of East African Community and Regional Development. And he was telling me how East Africa, I mean, a community of East African nations, if there is peace, if there is cooperation among nations, East Africa will prosper. And these national boundaries, in many ways artificial, created by our colonial masters, just as they created the boundary between India and Pakistan. So, Gandhi was for a very different kind of national existence based on international cooperation and international dependence. So this is relevant for Africa. Second, I said religious harmony. Religious disharmony is a matter that must concern every region in the world today. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, America, Europe, and I don't know much about Africa, but I'm sure that even here there is a certain problem. So religious harmony, respect for all religions, including religions that are native to Africa. I don't know much about pre-Christianity and pre-Islam religious, spiritual traditions in Africa, but they also must be respected. They should not be obliterated. The third way in which he is forever relevant is his advocacy for peace and non-violence. His strong condemnation of militarism. He had warned India, and India has not taken that path. He had said that we should not follow the example of the European powers by building strong militaries, strong navy. These are all a menace to humanity. India today is also building big navies. India has built a nuclear weapon. It is so anti-Gandhi. When America dropped the nuclear weapon on Japan, Gandhi was still alive. He said this is a sinful use of science. Nuclear weapons are a sinful use of science. It's a sin against God and sin against humanity. Relevant friends today, when some powerful nations, India included, they're spending enormous amounts of money on militaries. When there are so many people starving, so many people hungry, so many people unemployed, isn't it inhuman to build more and more lethal militaries? The fourth way in which he is extremely important to Africa, to India, and the rest of the world, he was a great champion of women's empowerment. And he said, in paying respect to women, he says that until now, the law of human evolution has followed the Darwin's law, that is, law of the survival of the fittest. He says for the future of humanity, there has to be and there will be a new law. And that new law is survival not of the fittest, but survival of the kindest. And who are the kind? Who excel in kindness and compassion? It is women. So he says that the future of humanity is in the hands of women. And women should become leaders. Because men so far have given a bad example. And he himself, he lived a life of such compassion and caring. Several of his women companions have written actually that sometimes we used to feel that he's not a man, he's a woman. In fact, one of his very close associates has written a book after his assassination. It's called Bapu, My Mother. He was called Bapu. Bapu means father. So this woman, Manu Gandhi, her name is Manu Gandhi, she has written a booklet of her reminiscences, and it's titled Bapu, My Mother. Bapu was like, not father, he was like my mother. He was so woman-like. So, in terms of the continuing struggle, I think you asked my wife, are you a feminist? My wife is engaged in women's movement in India, and so are many of you here. So, the women's movement had a great champion and will continue to have a great champion in Mahatma Gandhi. Next, friends, is green development, which is a very, very important contemporary concern. The word green development was not current when he was alive, nor was sustainable development. Climate crisis, climate change, these were not in discourse those days. But Gandhi said, Mother Earth has enough to satisfy everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. Mother Earth has enough to satisfy every human being's need, but not every human being's greed. So, a need-oriented, need-based development that satisfies the needs of all human beings is the way to save the planet. He was, in that sense, he was a green revolutionary. And lastly, he is one of the very few leaders of national liberation struggles who emphasized the importance of not just social change, but change of the self. Change of the self. His insistence that everyone should attempt to change oneself is unparalleled. There's a very famous saying of Gandhi, which says, be the change you wish to see in the world. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Many of us, we want to, this should change in our society. That should change in society. Fine, everything, it all should change. But at the same time, bring that change you want in society in yourself. So self-purification, self-rectification, self-improvement was a very important part of his whole politics. And that is why he used to fast. Fasting for self-purification.